Welcome to Royal Legacy, where we will explore the rich athletic history and deep family connections of BYU sports. Join us as we honor the past, celebrate the present, and look forward to the future of the BYU Cougars. Here's your host, Lauren McClain.
How's it going, everyone? I'm Lauren McClain, and welcome to Royal Legacy, where we dive deep into the family connections of BYU sports. Today, we have part 2 of my interview with current and former BYU offensive linemen Andrew and JT Gentry. Coming up, Andrew talks about making the transition from Michigan to BYU, and JT explains why offensive linemen are just different. I begin by asking JT what it's like having Andrew as a roommate. JT, you guys get to be roommates now, along with your wife and 2 kids, right?
Yes.
What's that been like having Andrew in your home?
It has been so cool, honestly. And I think just to piggyback on what Andrew was saying, before this, where, since 2016, lots of FaceTime calls. But to be honest, not a lot of, just time actually being together. And, the fact that we can honestly come back together, honestly, is very reminiscent of, what high school is like, for me and growing
your
up.
Your poor
as
wife. Oh, my gosh.
Yeah. But, no, and Andrew, I will say is, he's not a taker by heart. He's a giver, and I think the coolest part about Andrew being with us is seeing how my kids interact with him. It's almost like I got to keep my, dad status because like he's almost like the cooler dad,
The fun uncle.
Yeah, he's the fun uncle.
Yep.
But no, seriously though, my kids just love being around him and just light up, and you hear them, him putting in the door code to open our front door, Georgia. And it was said on the day in the life, Drizzle is his name, right? And she goes, Drizzle's home, and just runs to the door and shows him the craft she's been doing for the day. And even my little boy Taft, who's 10 months old, obviously as a 10-month-old, you get kind of shy around different types of people. And, very quickly when Andrew moved in, he was, again, just the fun uncle and would just go to him, and it's just been so cool, to be able to have him around and even just, fun from video game perspective. Occasionally we'll play some NCAA football and 2K and then, we'll go golfing. And it's just been very, very great.
Again, I'm feeling for your wife. She's like, where'd my husband go? He's back to high school. No, I think that's so cool. Andrew, so where did Drizzle come from, number one?
Yeah, so, we explained it briefly in the Day in the Life podcast, or the Day in the Life video, but it came from JT and his friends, actually, was who it came from. And so there's a Drake song called Headlines by Drake. We always listen to the clean version. But in the song, like, Drake calls himself Drizzy. And so they started calling me and Drizzle. They just kind of added on to it. And then in basketball, I was a shooter, right? My dad he taught us how, even though we were big, he said, you guys got to be outside shooters. And they'd say, oh, it's Drizzle because he's making it rain. And so that just kind of stuck. And then one of JT's friends, Christian Reisbeck is his name, we were at a basketball camp at Columbine High School. And he somehow heard, I can't even remember how he heard that was my nickname, but I was shooting free throws. And he just started yelling like, Drizzle. And the whole camp just started yelling it. And so from then on, his friends all started calling me Drizzle. My friends all started calling me Drizzle to the point where now that's all my family calls me. My parents don't call me Andrew anymore. They call me Drizzle. My niece and nephew only know me as Drizzle. I asked Georgia what my real name was the other day, trying to see if she knew my name was Andrew. She's like, it's Drizzle. And she was very set on it that it was Drizzle because she doesn't know me as anything else. And so a long backstory there, but yeah, and it's stuck ever since. What was that? Probably 4th grade?
Yeah, probably you're in 4th grade.
Yeah, I was in 4th grade. You were in 8th grade. So yeah, and ever since then it's stuck.
Well, now that Drizzle is the fun uncle, the funkle, what's your go-to activity that you love to do with your niece and nephew? Well, I guess more your niece because 10 months old is a little harder.
Yeah, Taft just likes to eat. So as long as I have food with him, then he'll eat.
All right.
But with Georgia, we go to Quick Quack. So we call it our Quick Quack date. So if Georgia's good and she's been good throughout the day, she loves Quick Quack. And so we go to Quick Quack and get the car washed. And then right after Quick Quack, we go and get ice cream. And so that's our thing is she knows that when it's time to go to Quick Quack, that we're going to go to Quick Quack and then get ice cream right after. So that's one of my favorite things to do with her. We got a trampoline at the house now, too. So as soon as I get home, now that the weather's nice, it's usually, Driz, let's go jump on the trampoline. So we'll go do that, too.
You be careful with that foot, Driz.
Yeah,
all right?
We've been good.
JT, do you ever offer life advice to your brother now that he's living in your house, or you just kind of let him do his own thing?
Oh, man, I get the life advice from this guy. No, I think the thing that, is special about our relationship is we really do just love to talk and honestly just bounce a lot of ideas off of each other, right? Mm-hmm. Like we'll just have long, genuine talks where, he'll give me such great advice. I say that sincerely, right? And I try to reciprocate. But I think, kind of going back to what we were discussing, like in high school, is I'm really grateful that, he's on the same spiritual, plane as we are as a family, and that, we kind of can see things through a gospel lens. And I think, when we're able to have these, deep conversations about a lot of different areas of life that, it's really just refreshing, and I'll be honest, I really do value that, I think, almost more than anything, of having him by, of just having, a best friend that I can truly just talk to about anything and can get great advice from.
Yeah, and he does give great advice too. He didn't say it there; he's being humble, but he does. He gives me great life advice, and he's not the nagging older brother that's giving me great advice. Drizzle, like you didn't clean your room, or you didn't do this, but he does. He gives me great advice, and he's been through, right? He's been a college athlete, graduated great. Now he's in the working world, and so he's done it. He's done it all at a very high level and done it very well. And so I look up to him a lot. I've done that, like I mentioned earlier. I've done that ever since I was a little kid, and so it's been fun to have that back again, right? To not just do it over FaceTime calls, because we still did, right? We talked very, very frequently, even when I was at Michigan, and then we talked once a week when I was on my mission too, on the P Day, and so we've never not been close. But to now be in the same house again, and to be able to just hey, if it was a rough day, like, hey man, I want to talk about this, or it's great to have him. We mentioned the story earlier about the Michigan State game of getting a blessing there, but being in Michigan, right, I had great ministering brothers, but it's different out there, right? You don't have neighbors right next to you that are members, right? The nearest member to me lived 15, 20 minutes away, right? And so now to have somebody that can give you a blessing if you're sick, or you need that advice has been really cool.
And he also went to BYU before you. So how has he helped you settle in to BYU and its culture? Because it's definitely unique, and I'm sure a lot different than what you experienced in Michigan. It
is, yeah. He's been great in that regard. I think the biggest thing for me is I could watch him, right? And so I kind of knew what was going on because we were so close even while he was in college. I kind of knew what to expect, and then coming in, I could ask him all my questions and whatnot. And I don't think he prepared me for everything. I should have seen it coming, right? But my first day in class, I sit down and I take my notes out, and the professor's like, "All right, who's saying the prayer?" And I was like, "Oh, we do that here. That's right." And it's like, "Oh, this is great." And I was like, "All right, yeah, we got to pray." And so he didn't expect me for all the culture shock, but now it's great. I love praying before class. I don't really think that, but no, he was great in helping me get settled in, and giving me a place to live was honestly the best thing to help me get settled in. But it's been great now to bounce ideas off of him. The other day I was like, "Oh, I'm at the JSB," and I was like, "Wow, it's fun to I can actually say these things now." Right? I was at Michigan. I was like, I don't know where that is, but it's cool.
JT, what's something football taught you about your little brother that maybe you wouldn't have learned otherwise as you've watched him compete?
I think, one of the things that, football just in general, teaches you from a very young age is how to battle adversity, right? And I think that, you look at both of our stories and they're very unique and different from one another. But I think that, through football and through life in general, you're going to have times where things are just going really well for you, right? And there are going to be times where things are not going very well for you. And, and you can look at that on a micro level, if you're just looking at football, right, in a game, right? Quarter one might not be great, but how are you going to respond in quarter two, right? But then on a macro level as well, right? The season might have gone, not gone as you planned. How are you going to respond the next season? And, I think I look at Andrew, especially through just all the craziness of, the transfer portal. And, I think a lot of people know that he initially committed to Virginia. Then on his mission, there was a switch to Michigan, and then, ultimately switched to BYU. And, I think just through that whole football process, it's taught me, just looking at Andrew, how you can stay level-headed and calm, through crazy situations. And that if you have that faith to keep on trusting and believing and acting, right? As you take that action, that amazing things can happen.
Well, we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we'll have more from BYU football brothers JT and Andrew Gentry. This is Royal Legacy. What's up, everybody? This is Lauren McClain from Her Why and Royal Legacy. If you like my podcast, make sure you check out Legends of 84. It's a 13-part audio documentary that dives deep into the 1984 National Championship football team. Check it out on the BYU Radio app or wherever you listen to podcasts.
And now back to Royal Legacy and your host, Lauren McClain.
Andrew, what about for you, watching your brother on the field? Because it's a whole different experience when you're watching him compete. What's something you learned about him as you watched him play?
Yeah, I think, honestly, for me, maybe it wasn't even as much watching him play, but watching him train. Like he mentioned, he wasn't an offensive lineman. He wasn't naturally big like I was in terms of, he was always tall, but in terms of carrying body weight. And so when they asked him to make the switch, you were what, 220, 240 pounds going into your junior year?
Not big.
Yeah, not super big. And then
I mean, that's big. But
yeah, it's still big, right?
Yeah.
Big for the rest of the world. But for an offensive lineman, you needed to put weight on. And I just remember, the dude would stuff like 3 peanut butter sandwiches in his backpack every day. And I knew it wasn't easy for him, and was always just eating constantly, but then working super, super hard in the weight room. And so I learned about him, just how dedicated and how diligent he was to being great, right? And whatever that was, and then seeing him in school. But I think in football, right, it was more what I saw off the field in his training and in his preparation to be great in high school, to get to that goal. Because I was blessed, right? I was blessed genetically to be a little bit bigger and have that. And but to see JT just put the work in and do that, I was like, well, I want to just work as hard as him, right? Even though I have that size and that, I want to work like he's worked. And so that was something that I learned from him.
Andrew, you seem like you have just an incredibly tight-knit family. When one of you is struggling, whether it's injury or just in life, how do you feel like you guys show up for each other?
Yeah, I mean, I think JT hit it right on the head with, being right there for me in that Michigan State game. Because that was, honestly, I can say again, I've lived a very blessed life, because one of the lowest moments of my life is walking to that locker room knowing that my season was done, right? And I just knew right away, I was like, it's done. It's over. And to have him right there, being a worthy priesthood holder, and then just constant calls, right? It was every day checking in, right? And then ordered me food the day after I had surgery, right? And made sure that I was taken care of that way. And so I think the biggest thing is it is that response, right? It's just immediately when somebody's in need, it's not a question of, okay, am I too busy to do this? Am I too busy? But it's an immediate action of, how can I help? What can we do to step in? And my whole family's that way, right? My mom was there at that game, stayed extra. She didn't fly home that next day. She stayed with me that whole weekend, came right back out when I had surgery. My dad then came out for that whole next week when I couldn't move. And so that's just the type of family that we've grown up in. And Elizabeth's the same way. I know she would do the same thing for us, right? Harder for her being in Nebraska. But that's just the type of family that we have, that at the drop of a pin, if something goes wrong, that our family is the first person that we turn to, right, is the person that's having something gone wrong. But then even before we can reach out, our family's going to be reaching out to us to help and be there along the way.
You both seem like you're incredibly faithful along with your family members. You both served missions. And then we're going to start with JT on this one. But what do you feel like those 2 years taught you that changed your perspective as you continued to play football later on?
That's such a great question. I think, one of the biggest things that most missionaries learn off the bat is that life is so much better when you can forget yourself and go to work, right? And I think to add on to that, forget yourself, put God first, and then go to work, right? And, I think that's one of the biggest things that my mission taught me, because I think most high school, graduates are naturally going to be pretty, self-absorbed up to that point, and not, completely, but naturally, right? I mean, you've had a lot of things given to you up to that point. You've had, you've been at home, right? And you're thrown into this situation where you really, need to, one, learn a lot of self-responsibilities, but two, you're constantly just focusing on others. And I think, from that perspective, again, I think going back to it, that, a lot of tough things might happen in life, but that if you can put in honest, sincere, and meaningful work into the areas that, matter most, and I think we read it, in the scriptures, right? Be anxiously engaged in good causes, right? And that doesn't necessarily mean it's like, okay, we're always, reading our scriptures and we're always, in church meetings and church interviews, right? But being able to carry the light of Jesus Christ, in everything that we do. Again, glorifying him through playing football, glorifying him through, working, glorifying him through being a husband and a father, right? I think that's one of the biggest things that, really has stuck with me for my mission, is that when you can adopt, a consecrated mentality towards life, that it becomes so much better. And it gives you the ability to even endure when life isn't maybe going as planned.
And you served in Hungary.
I did.
Is that right?
Yes.
And then we got Andrew over here who ended up serving in Orem. So
Hungary and Orem, very similar places.
Spanish speaking, that's important there. So probably similar perspective, but completely different areas. But what would you say you learned from those 2 years that you implemented later in football?
Yeah, and so I actually had a cool experience on my mission. So after a while on my mission, like I've told the story before of, Coach Harbaugh comes out, I flip to Michigan.
Yeah.
Tucanos.
Right?
Tucanos, yeah, you know it. So I was serving in the Sharon Park stake in North Orem at the time. And in that stake presidency was Eli Herring, a former BYU offensive lineman. So it's cool how the Lord works. I don't think it was by chance, right, for a number of different reasons that I was in that area. And so I remember after that happens, President Herring invited me and my companion to lunch at Tucano's. Went back to Tucano's, but went back with him. And I just had a chance to talk to him. Right? I was like, this is somebody that's done it, right? That was a really, really good offensive lineman, but is so faithful in the gospel. Just one of the best men that I've met. And I just was talking to him. I just asked him for advice, right? I said, coming off a mission, how did you do it? What do I need to do? What's different things? And he said, what I want to tell you is that what's important to you is important to the Lord. And the Lord knows that football is important to you. So even though, it may not be something that's directly church-related, right? Football, a lot of times I think we want to separate things in life, right? We want to separate, we can go back to what we talked about earlier, spirituality, scholastics, and sports, and say they're all separate things. But at the end of the day, to the Lord, they're really not, right? They're things that are important to his children, and so they're important to him. And so he told me that, and then I think that was just something that was so clear to me throughout my mission, that I realized that each of God's children are so important to him, right? And so when you're having a bad day and you're praying for revelation, seeking for inspiration, talking to somebody on the street, that's why I wanted to talk to everyone, right? Because those children are all so important to the Lord. So even maybe if they didn't realize it right then and they were rude to us or whatever, I had to give them that chance to let them know that somebody loved them. And then coming back from my mission, then being back here, maybe it turned a little more inwards, right? I try to keep that for other people as well, but realizing, okay, the Lord knows that football is important to me. He knows that it's something I want to be good at. And then coming back to what JT said, but using it to glorify him, right? So using football as a tool to bring people to Jesus Christ. And how great of an opportunity to do that at BYU. It's one of the things I love most about BYU is we can do that as a whole team, right? As a whole school. And I tried to do it as Michigan the best I could as an individual, but it's cool now to be a part of that, of realizing, hey, this is important to me. It's important to the Lord, but then how can I use this to be an influence for good and bring people to him?
What a cool perspective. I love that. And one of my favorite stories of you is when you were in the YSA bishopric while in Michigan, and Coach Harbaugh talks to you about that. Did he ask you in that moment, are you going to have time for this? Are you going to be able to prioritize football while doing this?
One of the coolest things about Coach Harbaugh is he never did. Even when I was on my mission, he never said, are you staying in shape? He never asked me how much I weighed. He was always just like, are you important to it? Is it important to you? Are you serving hard? And that's what he asked me. He said, wow. Are you working hard in your calling? I was like, yeah, I'm doing my best, Coach. He was just so focused on making sure that we were dedicated in whatever we were doing. And so when I told him about it, he was just asking me questions. Oh, what do you do? And then he asked me, he's like, how's the work going? You bringing more people in? I was like, well, Coach, I'm not a missionary anymore. We're trying to always bring people in, but it's not my main focus anymore. And he's like, well, is the church growing out here in Ann Arbor? I was like, slowly but surely. He's like, well, go get more. I was like, wow. So that's Coach Harbaugh's perspective. Is instead of him telling me, all right, back off, focus on football, focus on Michigan, he was encouraging me to serve harder in a bishopric that he had no idea what was until I explained it to him. But he was really cool in that regard. I'm
sure he saw something in you as well that he knew you could handle it. You know what I mean?
I hope.
I'm sure he knew you well enough. He's like, this guy's going to be all right. JT, offensive linemen are often the unsung heroes of games, and they get to do the dirty work. But what do you love most and maybe miss most about playing on the offensive line?
I think the brotherhood. Right. And I think, you look at the offensive line as a unit. Right. And I think that there's unique elements that no other position or unit on the field has. Right. I mean, you are 5 guys right next to each other. Right. And you have to be in lockstep with everything that you do. Right. And in the church, one of the biggest things we talk about is unity. Right. Being unified in Jesus Christ. And, you look at that parallels as an offensive line unit. And that is essential. I think that's one of the biggest attributes that makes a successful offensive line is that if you guys can be in lockstep with communication, footwork, assignment, right, and you can execute that at a very high level, something special happens, right? And, I think that that's one of the biggest things because as an offensive line unit, too, and Andrew can attest to this, is if you have that in games, it's naturally going to, translate to off the field as well, right? And, just having that room, of guys that you have each other's back, and that that, both on and off the field, you're going to be there for one another is a special kind of thing.
And so smart. I've interviewed a lot of offensive linemen. They're just extremely intelligent. I feel like that was something that surprised me a little bit. Not that you don't think football players are smart, right? But these offensive linemen, I'm like, oh, you're so brilliant. And so, Andrew, what do you feel like is something maybe the casual fan doesn't realize or understand about playing the offensive line position?
I think, like you mentioned, is just the detail that goes into being an offensive lineman. I mean, you know, you get the play call right. And I think so many people think, oh, you get the guy in front of you. I've talked to so many people like, you just block the guy in front of you. And I'm like, no, you don't just block the guy in front of you. And, you know, you get the play call and right away you have to know, all right, you know, what does this play entail? Then you walk up and you have this play. You know that your base assignment is, but then everything changes based on what the defense is doing. So you know your play. Then you have to go up there. You have to realize what defense the defense is playing. Then you adjust your calls. And, you know, as an offensive line, you have to be, as JT talked about, in sync every play, right? So we have to talk and communicate as a whole offensive line to make sure that we're on the same page and make sure we all know our assignments on that play. Because even though we have our base assignments, it's going to change based on that defense. And so you're talking to the guy next to you, telling the combination blocks that you have, making sure that everybody's identified correctly, and then the ball is snapped. But the thing is, you have to do that in a span of about 15 seconds, right? Jeez. So it's not like you get a lot of time to go up there. You have to process fast. You have to know it fast. But then I think, like JT said, I don't think people realize just how close you have to be as an offensive line. That guy next to you, you have to have chemistry with him to know that, hey, because there's so many times where you're just going to have to leave and trust that guy knows exactly what he's doing and that you can feel him with you. Even though you can't feel him, you can't see him, you just got to know that he's there. And so you're, you know, putting a lot of trust in the guy next to you. But I think that's one thing that I realize a lot of times that fans don't realize is they think, oh, it's a simple position. Just go block the guy hard in front of you.
Shove a guy.
Yeah, right? But at the end of the day, there's a lot that goes into it.
Such a difficult position. What does the Gentry family group chat look like on game day? That's something I want to know. What are we looking at here? Who's the loudest? Who's the craziest?
I'm going to say JT's the loudest.
Okay.
Probably the craziest.
Probably the craziest, too. Probably the craziest. Our family group chat's fun, though. We've had the same family group chat for, the last probably 6-7 years. You know, as soon as the iPhone started letting you name group chats, we named our family group chat the Modern Day Stripling Warriors. That's our family group chat. But on game days, everybody's super supportive. I think that's the biggest thing is, you know, I honestly don't check my phone very often on game day. I like to try to kind of stay away from it. But that's about the one text that I will check. And everybody before every game is just, we're praying for you. We know you're going to do great. But I think they know, for me, at least personally, that I don't like to get involved in a lot of stuff. I don't like to text people back a lot. I don't like to be super involved. But they're great of just, you know, giving me things that I love of just, hey, we're praying for you. We'll be rooting for you. We love you. And so maybe not as crazy as people think, but then on any other day, it's probably a little more crazy. Honestly, a lot more crazy than it is.
A little quieter on game day.
After the game, it gets crazy. That's for sure. They're always great.
Absolutely. No, I think one of the things that Andrew hit on too is just, you know, how we always really make it a point to pray for one another. And, you know, kind of Andrew shared a cool story about Ezra Taft Benson growing up. And one of the other cool stories that has really kind of trickled down is when he would speak, you know, in general conference and other, you know, settings. It was very common for, you know, the family, they're all sitting on the road together, to pass a note down, say, hey, pray for dad, pray for grandpa, pray for dad, pray for grandpa, right? And our mom really just culturally, you know, kind of taking that from her grandpa, you know, whenever there was a test, whenever there was a game, whenever there was anything, it was, hey, make sure you pray for this person, right? And today, I mean, you look at our group chat, it's like Elizabeth has a test at 4 p.m., make sure you're praying for her. Andrew has a test at 2 p.m. JT has a big, you know, job presentation, make sure and pray for him, right? And that is honestly a big part of our group chat is, you know, everyone stopping what they're doing, saying a prayer for each other, and then giving it our all.
We have a lot of fun in the group chat, too. We do. I mean, like, praying is obviously a big part of it, but you know, I don't want everybody to think that we only just pray in our family. We have a lot of fun in our group chat, too.
We do.
Oh, I have no doubt. We're here with BYU football brothers and offensive linemen Andrew and JT Gentry. Guys, you're incredible. I've learned so much, and I feel like I'm taking a lot away from this, so I really appreciate it. And Andrew, I cannot wait to see you in Cougar Blue come the fall.
As well.
Thank you so much, guys, for taking the time with me.
Thank you so much.
It's been great.
Thanks again to Andrew and JT Gentry for coming on the show with me, Annie Robinson and Christy Solomon to help produce this episode with senior producer Terry South. You can join the Royal Legacy wherever you get your podcasts, on Apple, TuneIn, Stitcher, Spotify, or on BYUradio.org. Royal Legacy is a production of BYU Broadcasting.